Welcome to the Swiss Army Podcast. I'm Colonel in the General Staff Matthias Muller, and I'm the host of this podcast. Today's episode is about elite sports and the promotion of elite sports. I have two guests with me today. On one hand, Michelle Heimberg. She is Switzerland's best diver and also a temporary service member at the Swiss Army's Competence Center for Sports. And also here in the studio today is the commander of the Swiss Army's Competence Center for Sports, Colonel in the General Staff, Marco Mudry. Welcome to the Swiss Army Podcast. I'm glad you're both here, but I'd like to start with Michelle first. As I mentioned, you are Switzerland's best diver. Now, not everyone in Switzerland follows diving very closely, I would say. Tell us, what have been the highlights of your career so far?
Well, I think the biggest highlights so far have definitely been participating in the Olympic Games in Tokyo, where I was also able to compete in the finals. I think that was certainly a success, but also a very big personal experience for me. And on the other hand, definitely when I became the first Swiss female diver to win a medal at the European Championships in 2017, and then in 2023, I was able to win the European Championship title as well. So I think those have definitely been the highlights of my career so far.
You actually didn't start out in diving, but rather, you originally began your journey in artistic gymnastics instead. Why did you make that switch?
That's right. I actually started out in artistic gymnastics, and I really spent my childhood and a big part of my youth there. But then, unfortunately, I had to switch sports because of injuries. I broke my kneecap twice, and so I really had to make a change, which was also necessary for my body. That's how I ended up discovering diving, because I was looking for a sport that was Olympic, since it's always been my dream to take part in the Olympic Games, and at the same time was easy on the knees. It became clear that my knees probably aren't the strongest part of my body, so a lot of sports I was interested in, like track and field or tennis, were simply out of the question. And then, really more by chance, I came across diving and very quickly developed a passion for it, because it's actually very similar to artistic gymnastics. I was able to get started right away and realized, hey, I'm actually really good at this too.
What fascinates you about this sport?
I think the fascination is that a dive lasts maybe just 1, or at most 2 incredibly brief seconds, and you just have to execute the movement, the sequence, as perfectly as possible. I think that's what fascinates me, or also what motivates me to keep training, because you go into every last detail and just see how close to perfection you can push your body and yourself. That's incredibly fascinating, but sometimes also frustrating, because you do the dives over and over again, but you still try to make that last percent perfect.
Was it difficult to switch from artistic gymnastics to diving? I imagine it's technically very demanding. And in which year did you make that transition?
Right. I made the switch in 2012 when I was 12 years old. I think it was just in time. If you make the switch any later, it gets even harder. A lot of the technique is similar, but still a bit different. And I think the biggest challenge for me was definitely that in artistic gymnastics, you always land on your feet. As soon as you land on your head, that's definitely not ideal, and it gets dangerous really fast. But in diving, everything is head first. So that was really difficult for me. Forward rotations were actually still okay, because you can see the water and have more control that way. But anything backwards, anything where you go headfirst backwards, the entry is basically blind. I really struggled with that at the beginning. It definitely took me a year and a half before I could add even half a rotation after a somersault, because for 8 years before that, every single day it was drilled into me, don't land on your head, it's way too dangerous. And then suddenly, from one day to the next, I had to do exactly that. So it was definitely a huge mental adjustment too, realizing that suddenly this extra half rotation is just normal and something you have to do.
But it's still really impressive. In just 5 years, you started at 12, and by 2017 you were already at the top, so to speak. That's incredible.
Yeah, I think I really benefited a lot from artistic gymnastics because I already had the movement patterns, the air awareness, the flexibility. I basically had all that from a young age. Of course, it was a big adjustment, but I think it also helped me a lot. I also think that artistic gymnastics is definitely a very mentally demanding sport. It's also not easy to deal with the pressure there. Artistic gymnastics is definitely even bigger than diving. That means you also have even more competition within Switzerland, and I think just growing up with that really helped me a lot. I think that's why, just a short time later, after only 5 years, I was already able to be successful internationally among the adults. I think, in the end, it's definitely true that in a sport where there are only 5 dives, everything has to go right on the day. There's also an element of luck in competition that plays a part. I think I was lucky things worked out for me right away at my first big international competition that I could enter.
Marco, you are the commander. I mentioned it, the Competence Center for Sports. You are also the commander of the Elite Sports Recruit School. Michelle was with you at the recruit school. Today, she is with you as a temporary service member. She is one of many outstanding athletes who are allowed to attend the recruit school with you. So it's also a privilege for you to lead such a school. My first question to you is, could you please explain, how do you select, or how is the selection made for those individuals who are then permitted or given the opportunity to join the elite sports program?
Well, the selection process for the Elite Sports Recruit School is a process that takes 14 months. I don't make the decision. It's a collaboration with Swiss Olympic, the sports federations, and of course, with us. The department head on my team, yours Walter, Staff Sergeant, is of course responsible for this selection process together with Swiss Olympic. First, the sports federations, usually the head of elite sports for a federation, have to submit a long list to Swiss Olympic and to us, because the sports federations know the potential athletes. Then, 1 year before the start of basic training, we hold an informational event so that all potential recruits can learn about the advantages, disadvantages, rights, and responsibilities. After that, there are discussions between elite sports representatives and the potential candidates. Then, a shortlist is created, and then a preliminary decision is made at the Army level, meaning the head of elite sports together with Swiss Olympic. After that, there's another round with the sports federations where the final decision is also presented. And 8 months before basic training starts, the list of selected individuals is released. We have fewer than 40 spots in the elite sports program per year, so 2 groups of 70.
Okay, but what are the criteria? You said the sports federations give you a long list. Can the sports federations just put anyone on there if they really want that person? Or are there specific criteria for that as well?
There are criteria on 2 levels. First, there are criteria for the sports federations and sports disciplines, and then there are criteria for the athlete. At the moment, we support 60 different sports. That's quite a lot, and we work with 40 sports federations, both winter and summer sports. Now, regarding the criteria for the sport, we primarily support Olympic disciplines that have a Swiss Olympic rating of 1 to 3. The rating goes from 1, which is the best, to 5. Then, for non-Olympic disciplines, we also support those with a rating of 1 to 3. One example is orienteering. It's not an Olympic sport, but Switzerland is among the best in the world. And then we also support other disciplines that have national significance. Schwingen, Swiss wrestling. That's one aspect. Then, the sports federation must also be willing to cooperate with the army, and of course, they must have the appropriate concepts in place, as required by Swiss Olympic and Natchwatches, etc. For the athlete, he or she must be fit for service. And that creates a hurdle because many athletes already have injuries that affect their fitness for service. Then, there must be potential for international success, and potential is always difficult to assess. The results are relevant, but potential is the second criterion, and they must have a commitment towards the army. Of course, they must also identify with the values of the army, and that's not the case for everyone. And those are more or less the important criteria on these 2 levels.
Okay. Now, you said there are 140 spots across 2 recruit schools. I imagine there are a lot more people who would like to join. So what happens to those who were on the long list but weren't selected? What do they do then? After all, those are also people with a certain amount of potential, otherwise they wouldn't be on the long list. They're all strong athletes, too. What happens to them? Do they just go to a regular recruit school?
So first I have to say, in the last 20 years, ever since the very beginning of the elite sports recruit school, this elite sports leadership, well, no, actually, on second thought, that's not quite right. The elite sports recruit school has massively increased the number of athletes we support over the last 20 years. Now we support around 900 athletes. Of course, we don't support everyone. We also can't select everyone for our program. There's a fourth category, which is the so-called qualified athletes. They go through regular recruit training, and if they meet the criteria, they're allowed to train 4 times a week for 3 hours each time. The system works very differently. It depends on people, circumstances, and the available infrastructure. It might work well for a few weeks, but as soon as there's a transfer or you take on a role in a regular military unit, it naturally becomes, for a variety of reasons, difficult to ensure this. So in this area, there's still a lot of potential, and of course, I sincerely want us in the future to have a truly comprehensive solution for everyone who doesn't make it into the elite sports program, so that they can still be successful later on, and maybe even, at least in my field of sports, so they can also genuinely take advantage of the various benefits during their military service.
You said qualified athletes train 4 times a week for 3 hours each. Now, depending on your stage in basic training, it's also hard to manage those 4 3-hour sessions. Or, for example, if you train in a team sport, you also have to factor in travel time. So it gets difficult. You just said that we still need to do something about this, as you mentioned earlier, because I'm actually a bit concerned that individuals who aren't accepted might, in some cases, try to get out of the army on medical grounds, or even end up doing civilian service instead. And in my honest and considered opinion, that would truly be a shame, because often these are people who would actually like to do military service, but simply because they're elite athletes. In reality, it just doesn't fit into that period between 20 and 24 years old.
There's definitely still potential there, because we're losing far too many who play in top leagues, in various team sports, who then either do their service during the day, go into civilian service, if they don't manage to get into our elite sports program. There's potential in that area. I have some ideas about how I want to improve that. That's something I'll be working on in the coming months.
Okay, back to Michelle. You just completed the elite sports recruit school. You decided to join the army as a woman. So was the army always an option for you, or how did that come about? What inspired you? What motivated you to do military service?
Well, I think the topic of the military, or rather the army, was always present, even at home. My father was in the military, he continued on, and now my brother is continuing as well. So I think the military, or even just the uniform at home, you always saw it from a young age, hanging somewhere in a closet. And I think that's how the connection to the army was there early on, that it was something good. And I also saw that my father and my brother both enjoy going, and I think that's always been in my mind, that this exists. And when I realized later in my career, hey, I can actually combine this with sports, it became clear very quickly that I wanted to do it too, because I simply dive into the water. It's a smaller sport. It's not a sport like soccer or ice hockey, where you definitely have other opportunities, including financially, to shape your career the way you want. And so, when it was shown to me that, hey, there is a way, it was actually clear to me that I would really like to do that too. Even though I'm a woman and actually don't have to, it was also a privilege for me to have gotten this opportunity.
So, if I understand correctly, it would definitely have been an option for you to do military service, as I understand it, even if you weren't really a top athlete?
I think that definitely wouldn't be out of the question, because like I said, I know a lot of people who say that recruit school, sure, it's not easy, it's a tough time, but it's also a wonderful time in life, because of the people you meet or just realizing what you're capable of. Even if you keep going and do a 100-kilometer march, just seeing what you can accomplish, it's simply a great feeling. And I think it definitely wouldn't be out of the question that I would have done it even outside of sports, because I just know the Army can also be a really great time.
You went through recruit school. You said the Army can be a great time. I hope you also had a great time in recruit school. You surely had certain expectations when you went to Magdalene. What surprised you the most in recruit school?
I think at the beginning, it was definitely the feeling of being in uniform, especially in green. Normally, in my sport, I wear a swimsuit. That's basically my uniform, my gear for sports, and being in green with combat boots is something completely different. But I think what surprised me, or actually surprised me in a good way, is that in the Army, you really, everyone is treated the same. And that's really amazing. And I think it's the same in sports. You see that whether you're in a smaller sport or already at the top in soccer or wherever, the people in the Army treat everyone the same. And I think that was really wonderful to see, because you're valued equally everywhere, no matter what you do, especially in the Army. And I think that was definitely great. And also surprising, because in sports, even just taking soccer as an example, there are already big differences between men and women, but in the military, you're treated the same everywhere, and that was really a great experience.
So, the camaraderie, what was it like getting to know these different people from various sports? How did you experience that?
That was definitely very special, but also cool, because otherwise, I do an individual sport, and you're often on your own there, and I think just having the chance to interact or to ask, hey, how do you do it? How do you deal with it? When things aren't going so well, just knowing that, in the end, others are in the same boat. Others also have to worry, how am I going to finance my next competition? Just having that exchange, really being on the same level as other athletes in similar situations, getting advice, and simply knowing, hey, there are people out there going through the same things, and you can support each other that way.
Have you noticed any differences between the sports? Are there any stereotypes? Like all soccer players are like this, all skiers are like that, all divers are like this. Did you notice that? Is there?
I don't want to single out any particular sport, but I do think you can tell that athletes who are often on their own, compared to those in team sports, have experienced more or just have to organize a lot of things themselves. So for me too, when I go to competitions, sometimes I organize everything myself. I look up the flights, I search for accommodations. I think that's definitely different from team sports, where everything is organized for you. And I think you just noticed that for us, it's become normal, but for others, it's more like, oh, you still have to do all that yourself? It's more like, yeah, they're surprised that that's how it works. And I think that's where you really notice the differences, whether you're an individual athlete or a team athlete, and also how big your sport is in Switzerland.
You mentioned it earlier, a fringe sport. If you're not in the military, or before you joined the military, what was your daily routine like? So how do you finance the sport? What do you do? I mean, a soccer player or an ice hockey player, they make a living from it, they train for it. That's something you or others in fringe sports can't do. So what was your daily routine like before?
Well, I think before, but honestly still now, we're always looking for people who maybe share the same passion for the sport, who want to support you. Because in the end, like I mentioned before, my uniform is a swimsuit and I can't put 10 logos on a swimsuit. We also don't have a main sponsor that's very visible, like, for example, the skiers do. And I think that's why having a job alongside your training is just necessary to raise the financial means as well. That means looking for sponsors, and also for people who are genuinely excited about what you do and who want to support you in that way. I think the Army has now also become, yes, I have the privilege that they've become an additional supporter for me, where I get that kind of support. But even with the Army, it's still basically a small part-time job on the side, just to be able to finance my life as an athlete.
But would you say that, thanks to the Army, you're actually able to be almost like a professional athlete, even in a niche sport, at least for a certain period of time, from your perspective?
That's definitely the case, yes. And now, starting this year, I've also been accepted into the time-limited military program, and I think that's definitely a big and important step that will allow me to pursue my goals the way I want to in the coming years. Because the support simply allows me not to have to think, hey, should I go to this training camp? Does it fit into the budget or not? Instead, it gives me the freedom to know that if I need this training camp or this competition, I can do it in order to ultimately achieve my big goal for the season. And I think the Army really has my back here, so I know I can do everything I need to in order to ultimately be successful and represent both the Army and Switzerland internationally in the best possible way.
The elite sports basic training. As we said, it's an opportunity to almost live like a professional, even for athletes in less mainstream sports. But how exactly does this elite sports basic training work? So explain, what happens there? How does this basic training for recruits actually work?
Well, there are two starting dates. The first basic training starts in mid-April. This way, a skier, like a successor to Marco Odermatt, can join us after the season in mid-April, and the training lasts until mid-August. That way, they're ready for the next winter season. The second basic training starts at the end of October. These are more for summer sports. That way, they can join the summer competitions and then train with us over winter. It's ideal. Basic training lasts 18 weeks, just like everywhere else in the Army. For the first 3 weeks, we do regular routines and basic military training. It starts with medical training, the military protocols, so they understand what a colonel is, a corps commander, a quartermaster, a lieutenant, but also so they learn the national anthem. That's extremely important for them as well. And during the daily routine in the first 3 weeks, there's also sports, and in the evenings, if possible, recovery time. After these first 3 weeks, there's a phase where specialized training for elite sports takes place. In addition to athletic training, this includes communication and media training provided by our specialists from the Command for Leadership and Communication. There is also mental training, nutrition, anti-doping, and career management taught by lecturers from the Mucklingen University. And all of these elite sports-specific trainings provide the skills and competencies needed to enable sports soldiers to empower these top athletes. And in the final weeks, up to week 18, the focus is specifically on elite sports. And it's also important to mention that throughout all 18 weeks, the relevant sports association is responsible for the athletic supervision. So it's not the head of the Department for Elite Sports who writes the training plans. In a typical basic training, that is, elite sports basic training like the current one, we have about 20 sports and 70 recruits. And there are at least 20 coaches or coordinators per association who ensure that this content is delivered properly. That's how the elite sports basic training works. It's also possible to be abroad during basic training. Let's take curling as an example. We have 5 people in curling, and the 4 women have already been abroad twice for the World Cup. During basic training, they were in Canada and took part in a World Cup event, coordinated with the Sports Association.
Okay, so if I understood correctly, the sport is provided by the association. So the national coach or someone from the association comes in to lead the training, and the rest is handled by you or the Federal Office of Sport.
Is that correct? Yes, exactly. The basic military training is handled by us, as well as the leadership. In the first 3 weeks, we have time squad leaders and a few sergeants for the basic training. But starting from week 4, there are no more militia cadres. That means it's me as the commander, 2 staff sergeants, and a unit administrator who are in charge of everything. This also creates a certain closeness. Okay.
But for example, everyone who goes to basic training knows that tomorrow at 5:30 is wake-up call, then breakfast, and then at 7 o'clock is roll call. Is it the same way in Maglingen? Does everyone stand in formation at 7 o'clock in the morning and report to you? Or how does a typical day work there now?
Yes, it works pretty much like that. Usually, at 7 o'clock, there's roll call, then the national anthem is sung in German, French, and sometimes Italian, but that's not for all 18 weeks. It's mainly during the first 6 or 7 weeks that it happens like this. But after that, everything becomes individualized. That means not all 70 are on site the whole time.
Okay, and now let's talk about basic training. So, a regular member of the Army does basic training. After that, they're assigned to their unit, where they then do refresher courses. How does it work for elite athletes? Are they also assigned somewhere? How does it work with the refresher courses? Tell us about it.
Basic training for elite athletes is like a springboard. For the first time, all these athletes can train under professional conditions. When they finish basic training, they're assigned to my department, the sports division. At the moment, we have about 900 athletes. And all these athletes are allowed to complete up to 130 service days per year for training and training camps. Maglagen, Tenero, Andermatt, South Africa, North America, China, depending on what is relevant for their sport. And of course, if they're in Maglagen, Tenero, or Andermatt, then they have infrastructure, accommodation, meals, everything included. Otherwise, at least they receive pay and compensation for lost earnings. And very important, military insurance. So, the support we provide as the Army is incredibly substantial. It's really important and a major commitment. It's also important to know that support from the sports associations is relevant. They have to ensure that support, because with just 5 people in the elite sports division, I can't send my people all over the world. That's not our role either. Another important thing to know, every single sports soldier is planned for individually. So, it's not a deployment for the entire company. And this is coordinated with the sports associations, who plan it accordingly. We then issue the marching orders. Last year, these approximately 900 sports soldiers completed 66,000 days of service. What you also shouldn't forget are the support staff. We also support, through voluntary service days, trainers and coaches who are allowed to complete their service days with the sports associations under the same conditions. That means there are fewer than 84 of them. So, altogether, this whole group is about 1,000 people that we support.
Okay, but this is important. I want to emphasize this. You said such a refresher course can also take place in China, South Africa, or anywhere else. But the people and also the supervisors, they receive pay, insurance, that's it. So it's not like they get marching orders and then fly to South Africa with those orders. The Army does not finance this.
No, absolutely not. With the marching orders, you can report for duty in Switzerland. You can use food, lodging, and infrastructure at federal locations like Marklingen, Tenero, and Andermatt. For all other expenses abroad, you can't just fly to Paris or Berlin with the marching orders. That's not possible. Those costs are, of course, paid by the clubs or by the athletes themselves.
You just mentioned Paris. You said it yourself, you were in Tokyo. But Paris didn't work out. For what reason?
I just barely missed it. One dive didn't go well, and then the dream was already over.
How does the selection process work in diving? Which dive was it that didn't work out?
In diving for us, it's basically that you have 2 competitions that count toward qualification. And there, you just have your dive routine. For women, it's 5 dives. For men, it's 6 dives. And in the end, you just have to be in the top 18 or, in some cases, the top 12. And you basically have 1 day, or maybe 2 days, where you have to deliver your performance. And if you're sick or injured, then you're basically out already. You've already lost your chance. But even if just one of your 5 dives doesn't go well, like what happened to me, then the dream is over.
I imagine that's incredibly. That's an enormous amount of pressure. So you basically have 10 dives, 5 each day, and you have to deliver a top performance on at least one of those days, right? How do you deal with that pressure? Like you said, it's definitely a lot of pressure. It's definitely not easy, but I think, on the other hand, athletes, or at least I'm aware, that everyone is in exactly the same situation. Everyone is in the same boat, and in the end, it's just the athletes who can handle it best mentally on that day who make it. And for me, like I said, it only worked out on one jump, and that was a huge disappointment, because in a fringe sport you train for 4 years for one big goal, and in just 1 second, it was basically all over. That's definitely incredibly tough, a lot of pressure. But I think that's also part of what makes the sport what it is, that you have to deliver your performance exactly at that moment. You have to perform, and that's just part of it. Setbacks are part of it too.
This was the first time I experienced something like this to such an extent. It was definitely a very tough time, but looking back, I know that this is what will make me stronger now, especially on the road to Los Angeles in 2028, just learning from it, realizing, hey, what maybe didn't work out? What can you do differently in your preparation? How can you prepare yourself even better for this kind of pressure? Just ultimately hoping or doing everything you can to make sure it doesn't happen again. But in the end, it's also good. We're human beings, not machines. That means we can't plan exactly how things will turn out, but I'm just making sure that I do everything I can in my preparation and use my resources so that I can achieve my big goal again in 2028.
So would you say that without setbacks like these, you can't really get better, because you wouldn't be able to learn? If everything always works out more or less, you don't really know. Is this just a coincidence? And could this actually be a chance for you to become even better?
Yeah, I think so. At first, everyone says, oh, you'll come back stronger, and you don't see it right away. Of course, I was devastated, and it felt like my whole world had collapsed. But with a little distance, you realize, hey, there are actually a lot of advantages to this. Now I also realize that I've learned a lot about myself. I've learned, okay, like you said, maybe before things just always worked out. Maybe there was always a bit of luck involved that things went my way. And this way, I really had time to sit down and look at things. Hey, what actually works well? What maybe doesn't suit me so well? Did I just always do things a certain way because that's how they were done? And for me, it was also a huge opportunity to really realize, what do I need? What do I no longer want? What do I want to change in order to move forward? Because it's true, when things always just work out and you're always successful, you don't really question much. And it's only when you face a setback and things don't work out that you start to think, hey, what could I change and what shouldn't I? So looking back, it's definitely a huge opportunity for me. Yeah, I've learned a lot, also on a personal level. And now I know what I can change so that I can get the most or the best out of myself in the coming years.
But how do you deal with it now, nonetheless? You're analyzing it now. You're trying to learn from it. But how does it actually feel? We have a lot of really great athletes in sports, and that final step to the very top is ultimately, above all, a mental one. It's about having that mental strength. How do you train your mental strength? What tricks do you have? How do you do it?
Well, I think it's actually less about tricks and more about the fact that I've actually been working with a mental coach or a sports psychologist for quite a long time now, honestly. And I think for me, training that mental strength really starts during practice. It begins in training, not just with the mindset of, hey, it's a big competition and everything counts now, but rather already feeling during training what works and what maybe doesn't. And for me, that was kind of the key. But I think in general, the term mental health has definitely become much more prominent, and it's important not just to talk about it, but to actually live it as well. If I notice that something is scheduled for a certain day, but it's just not possible, then I talk to the coach to see what's doable and what's not. That way, I can keep my joy and motivation, because as soon as you lose that, you're just going through the motions. Then getting up in the morning feels different, because you know you just have to do it. So I think in general, just try to have fun with what you're doing. Of course, there are tough days when you don't feel like it, but overall, you should make sure that having fun is a top priority. And then, at the competition itself, there are definitely some little tricks you can use, whether it's a ritual you always do, like always doing the same thing during your warm-up or eating the same food. But in the end, it's definitely very individual and just comes with experience. You take part in so many competitions, and at some point you realize, hey, this works for me, or this doesn't work as well. But I think it's really hard to give general advice, because it's so individual. But what I've definitely realized, especially because of the setback, is that fun and enjoyment always have to be part of it. Otherwise, you're just doing it without really knowing why.
So, knowing your why and really enjoying it. You mentioned that you work with a mental coach, with a mental trainer, even during the elite sports recruit school. Did you already look at things like that there? So, mental training, sports psychology?
Yes, that's already a topic in recruit school. So we actually had introductory courses there as well. We were also given contacts we could reach out to if we needed support. In my case, I was already very well supported there. So I already had my contacts. But for athletes who don't have that yet, the Army actually offers contact points in this area where you can reach out. And for everyone, we also go through another kind of training, and I think that's extremely valuable as well. Even though I was already being supported, I still got to see things from a different perspective. Maybe I would have realized there, hey, that actually appeals to me too. And that way, I would have had the chance to use those contacts and try something new as well.
Michelle is indeed a woman. What is the percentage of women in the elite sports recruit school?
On average, about 30% of the elite sports recruit school are women. In the current recruit school, 34% are women, and overall in the specialist sports division, meaning WKGBS, about 20% are women.
Yeah, that's a huge amount, 30%, and right now even 34%. The Army's goal is 10%, a 10% share of women, but you have significantly more. Why is that?
Because the elite sports recruit school gives female athletes their first opportunity to train under professional conditions. In Maglingen, they have everything they need. Everything is close by. And one of the key points that keeps coming up, which is also what Michelle mentioned earlier, is this camaraderie that develops. Because you very rarely have the chance for young athletes from different disciplines, such as swimming or gymnastics, to live together for a certain period of time. This exchange is a huge added value. And of course, the support system works. The successes prove that. And naturally, if you have a path that leads to success, then many people want to take that path.
But you still have to say, a man has to go into the military. A woman does it voluntarily. And now we have, as you said, you have limited spots. So 140 per year. About 30 to 34% are taken by women, meaning by volunteers who wouldn't have to do military service. That means 34% of the spots are no longer available to men, who not only have the challenge of their careers, their sports careers, but also the added challenge of having to do military service. Isn't that almost a bit unfair to the men who then actually can't get into the elite sports basic training and have to do military service during their careers, which the women don't have to do?
So, the selection process. And we are allowed to select now because we have many potential candidates. Success, regardless of whether it's a woman or a man. I mentioned the criteria earlier. That's one aspect of equal treatment. Of course, for the men who don't make it into the elite sports basic training, currently, the unqualified athletes, it's still not optimal and is handled very differently. But like with any activity in sports, in elite sports, there are also people who lose. And in the future, it's about making sure we don't lose these people from the Army. That's an important point, that we find solutions so that we don't lose these elite athletes. Those who, at 19, might not yet be at the top world level in an endurance sport, but maybe at 24 or 25, in cross-country skiing, triathlon, and all these sports. We want to make sure we don't lose them, that they're in the Army with better conditions than they have now, even if they're not in the elite sports basic training. That way, later on, they might be transferred to me, and then they can perform accordingly and inspire Switzerland to dream, just like in every other sport.
Have you ever been confronted with someone telling you that you perhaps took a spot away from a man?
Yes, I think that's definitely been an issue before. I've heard that before too. But I think in the end, it's not my fault that I got the spot. And I also think we are selected and we've earned our place. We've shown the performance that, yes, that even got us into this position in the first place. And I think for us women, it's definitely an incredible opportunity. And I actually see it in a positive light. In sports, we get to do this. We're having a great time, and maybe it can also motivate women who aren't from the sports world to say, hey, come on, let's join the army. It's a great time.
You mentioned earlier that the Swiss and Switzerland can still dream of more medals. Could you tell us, in your opinion, what is actually the overall track record of the Swiss Army's elite sports support program?
If we look back, in 2024, Switzerland won, I believe, 92 medals internationally, and 78%. So 78% of all these medals at World Championships, Olympic Games, and European Championships were won by sports soldiers. If I look at the Olympic Games in Paris, Switzerland won 8 medals, and 5 of those were by sports soldiers. And the only Olympic champion, Chiara Leone, is a sports soldier, or more precisely, a sports corporal. If we look toward the Paralympic Games, we've been supporting para-athletes for 4 years. The Swiss delegation consisted of 27 people, and 9 of them were sports soldiers. Switzerland won 21 medals there, and 13 of those 21 medals were by sports soldiers. That's an incredible achievement. So, this elite sports program in the Army has become a relevant support system within the entire Swiss sports system.
So, an extremely successful record. When you hear what you're saying now, do you think it's even possible today for Switzerland to keep up at the top in sports if this elite sports support from the Army didn't exist at all?
I think, over time, this important role has grown, and as the Army's elite sports support program, we are now recognized by all the relevant stakeholders in sports, by Swiss Olympic, Swiss Paralympic, the Federal Office of Sport, and all the sports federations. And now it has become normal that, along the athlete's journey, what the federations and Swiss Olympic are planning, the elite sports recruit school and our support systems are also considered and evaluated. And that's why there is so much interest in our elite sports recruit school.
How other countries do it.
In other countries, they started much earlier than we did. Since most countries, neighboring countries, no longer have a militia system, they naturally have employed personnel. So, when I look at what was done in France, for example, they gave the positions to employed people or army members with a contract, such as a service contract, so that they could also be successful in the country.
Yes. You just mentioned it. You hinted at this huge success. Let me ask you this. Would it even be realistically possible for you, in your situation, to dream of Tokyo 2028 if the Army didn't support you?
Well, I think I could still dream about it, but actually making it happen would definitely be very different, because the Army has simply become an important partner. Support, especially in smaller or niche sports, is incredibly important and even essential for me to be able to follow through with my plan. So, dreaming about it, probably yes, but actually making it happen would probably be much harder.
Yes, you're now in the military, and that's actually the reason 2028 is Los Angeles. So how does one become a full-time member of the military? That's actually a different level than just being a sports soldier. Tell us about it.
Exactly, so for us, it's basically the same process. We are also first, we complete the RS, then enter the WK system. And I think it's fair to say that being full-time military is definitely in high demand among us athletes, because it means even more support is available. And it's actually like applying for a regular job, I would say. There's an evaluation process involved. That means you submit your documents. And in the end, the Army, together with Swiss Olympic, decides who gets these positions. positions. But for us athletes, it's really just like a normal job application process.
How many military positions do you have?
We have 18-time military positions, so that's 9 FP, and the 19 winter sports and 9 summer sports. The newly selected ones, like Michelle, we support for 4 years, up until after Los Angeles, and the other 9 from the winter sports we support until after Milano Cortina. And then, after Milano Cortina, we select the next ones for the following Olympic Games. In this case, I handle the selection together with the head of Elite Sports and Swiss Olympic, because they are my employees.
Okay, so you said they are your employees.
Contract.
With a contract. How? Percentage-wise?
It's a year-round position with a 50% employment rate. But you shouldn't imagine that Michelle comes to me on Monday morning and I hand out assignments. Her job is to train, to win competitions, and now I can get to the point, right? What is the role of sports soldiers and sportswomen? So it's not just about military time. It's like I always say, they defend Switzerland with special weapons, not with assault rifles and pistols. And these special weapons are international achievements, winning medals and exemplary behavior, being a role model in all areas of life. They inspire, they motivate all of Switzerland. That's the role they have. That's why she doesn't have an army PC, for example.
Yeah. So you're saying they defend Switzerland. The Swiss Army now has the slogan, the Swiss Army defends. You're saying that's already a form of defense. Yeah, you could also say it's a representation of Switzerland. But do you feel like a defender of Switzerland?
Yeah. I think definitely. Well, it's not with the weapons training that we have, but I definitely also represent Switzerland. And I definitely defend Switzerland, just in a different role than people might expect. But in the end, I think in my mind, it's simply that I also get to represent the army and Switzerland beyond our borders.
Yes. So I see that as a top athlete you represent Switzerland now. But to what extent do you also represent the army? So is there enough visibility for our part-time soldiers, our top athletes, so that people realize, yes, these are people who have been supported by the army? So, for example, in your case, how do your fans notice? Unless they're listening to this podcast right now, how do your fans realize, oh, you're in the army? Or, I mean, you have sponsors. You mentioned it earlier. You can't have that many sponsors because you only have a swimsuit. Others have their sponsors, their logos everywhere. So what does the visibility look like for the army in your case?
I think it's definitely about presence on a different level. It's not just the logo that I have printed on my jersey, but it's also about being present on the website, on social media, and in media appearances, where the conversation is about support and the army is a topic. And I think it's just more like, especially now during our time in the military, that we show even more clearly that this is part of us as athletes, that we're able to do this thanks to the army. That means it's not just that I have a bottle with the army logo and put it everywhere, but it's also active, it's communicative, it's shared on social media, my post gets published where people can see, hey, thanks to the army I'm able to do this and that. So it's definitely on a different level and actually more integrated into everyday life, rather than just constantly carrying a bottle or a logo with me.
Are there any requirements that the army sets? For example, if someone joins and becomes a full-time soldier and is under contract, is that specified in the contract? Do you have to, let's say, make one post per month on social media showing that you're in the army? You have to have the logo there, whatever. Are there any requirements like that?
The contract does, of course, include the point about the role as an army ambassador. But it's not specified, and there's no requirement for a certain number of appearances per year or anything like that. But what many people forget, all the other 900 athletes have signed an athlete agreement with me, with an employer if there is one, and with the sports federation. And they also have a role as ambassadors. It's about visibility, having the logo on clothing, if possible. But that's also quite complicated, depending on the sport, because there are certain legal regulations at the international level where it's not allowed. When I talk about the logo, for example with Swiss Ski, Marco Odermatt and all the sports soldiers have the Swiss Army logo on the right side. ODI has 7 jackets, and now we have the logo on 2 of them. But the logo is just one aspect. The presence and appearances they make, like today, but also public events with sportswomen and sportsmen in the military, where they talk about the army and what they receive from the army. That's one part, but the central part, of course, social media and so on, are also important. But for me, the main thing is that all these sportswomen and sportsmen in the military identify with the values of the army, that they are proud to be part of the army. Michel also talked about camaraderie earlier. With the training we provide in basic training, they also become competent in their roles. And what else is important? Discipline. And I think Michelle has proven that discipline is crucial in her sport.
I think almost all the athletes who have come to you have already shown that they have a lot of self-discipline. You said they are ambassadors. Now, if someone is listening, let's say, for example, someone from an officers' association or something like that, and says, wouldn't it be great if a female athlete or an athlete could come to the General Assembly as a speaker, or perhaps even as a keynote speaker? Can they contact you and make such requests?
Absolutely. I get requests almost every week, all kinds. And in the last 2 years, there have been more and more requests. And of course, we assess whether it's possible. And for most of the appearances I've had in recent years, I've always brought along 1 or 2 sports soldiers. So you have both men and women and can showcase different sports and experiences. I've done everything from a small appearance for one person in my office to an event in front of 600 people. Or, for example, Keanu Leon was at an annual report meeting of the Netra Ritual Division. So, there is definitely willingness. But the idea isn't that after this podcast we get 10 requests a day. But these sports soldiers can, of course, share something about their experiences, about what they've been through, and there might be points that are relevant for us as professional military personnel, as soldiers, and as leaders in the Swiss Army.
We mentioned it earlier, the defense. In the past, sports soldiers also had an assault rifle. That hasn't been the case for a few years now. Why is that?
In 2017, before my time, it was decided to do away with personal weapons. The focus was to integrate training that is specific to elite sports. And so all these training modules that we now conduct, communication, media, optional English, nutrition, anti-doping, and so on, were introduced. And the focus is now on this kind of training in Altdorf. And of course, at that time, they had to give up weapons training.
But can you understand that there are people who say, well, then they're not real soldiers?
They have a different role. The weapons they have are special ones, the ones I mentioned earlier. Success, being successful, and serving as a role model. Of course, if it ever became necessary, if it came to that, I'm sure Michel and everyone else could learn it very quickly. But I think their role as role models, as motivating figures, especially in tough situations, has a greater impact. That is soft power. It affects the doctors, inspires the young people, not just in sports, but in general, to fight for their own goals, and all those values they represent. That is extremely important.
Would it have bothered you if you had received an assault rifle and undergone firearms training?
No, I don't think it would have bothered me, but I also think that in my case, it was clear that this wasn't part of the training. For that reason, I never really thought about how it would have been.
Maybe let's go back to camaraderie for a moment. You mentioned camaraderie earlier. You already said it was something special, right? Individual sports, team sports. How is it for you, coming from a fringe sport where, as you said, you have to organize everything yourself? Finances. You have to fight. You have to look for sponsors. And a lot of people always have this idea. Yeah, all top athletes make an incredible amount of money. There are only a few who can really make a living from it, to be honest. And when you were in basic training, what was it really, truly like for you? This difference between people who, at the age of 20 years old, can already make a good living from their sport, and others who really have to struggle. How did you experience that, and what did it trigger in you?
I think, in my opinion, in general that's always an issue, but even when I saw how things could be different, in the end I also know I chose this sport because I truly enjoy participating in it so much, not because there's big money in it. If I had wanted that, I know I would be in the completely wrong sport. But ultimately, I think that's just part of it. I know there are very few people who can actually make a living from sports, even in Switzerland, even in skiing. It's only those at the top, or in tennis too. There are very few. For that reason, it never bothered me. Sometimes I wish I didn't have to think, how are things financially right now? Can we still afford to do this or not? But basically, I think that's also part of it, that you become independent very early on, that you take things into your own hands, that you organize things yourself. And yeah, that's just part of sports as well. I don't really question it much, because I just know that's how it is in Switzerland. I chose this path, it was my own decision. I want to do this sport, so I also have to do everything that comes with it.
You can really feel that with you. You like it, not just your sport. You also like the army. I mean, sometimes you can really tell. You have a certain enthusiasm for it. But now, hand on heart, have you never thought, why did I decide to do military service? Why am I wearing this green uniform?
MHM. Honestly, no. Because I've never thought, the army is an obstacle for me. For me, it was actually special. I did my basic training during the Corona period. That means I already had the privilege of being able to move around freely in Maglingen. I was also allowed to train up there. Everywhere else, the indoor swimming pools were closed. So I actually had an opportunity there that was made possible for me by the army. I think that's something that continues throughout. After basic training, with the refresher course system, I had additional income. If I had been injured, I could have used the resources in Maglingen. Now, ever since the military anyway. That is, no. I think I've never experienced a single night in my current situation where I would have said, hey, the army is an obstacle for me. On the contrary, really. It's simply a support program that really helps me, allowing me to practice my sport and stick to my goal.
So overall, a positive experience so far. But if you were the commander of the elite sports recruit school, what would you change?
It's hard to say off the cuff, but I think now that I have the privilege of experiencing what it's like to be in the military, I have a new perspective. It's definitely always a big topic. How can we make it possible for even more athletes to have this opportunity? Because even now, I think there were an incredible number of people who applied for this position. In the end, I think it's not easy for anyone involved to just say, hey, you can, you can't. Maybe it's about creating more opportunities there as well. I think a lot is already being done in basic training to make more spots available, but it's important to keep expanding that so there are even more positions in the military for athletes. Probably not directly Marco's job now, but I just think in general, the opportunities should become even greater, also for other athletes. Yes, to be able to practice sports professionally.
What projects are you working on at the moment? Or visions? Maybe also. Or what are you working on? You're surely always trying to further improve elite sports support and the elite sports basic training, right? What are you working on, and what are your ideas for the future?
We have a Vision 2030 for the Army's elite athletes. It was developed in 2022 together with Swiss Olympic and Pacho. and it was approved by the head of the Department of Defense. Now we're in the implementation phase, and here are a few key points about this vision. Our federal counselor Viola Amherd wants medals that shine sustainably, and of course, it's about international success. But it's also about making a career in elite sports more attractive for athletes, as well as for coaches, both men and women. It's about making even better use of the potential of both athletes and coaches. That's what it's about. One aspect is the ethical aspect, clean sport, fair sport, and this is the fifth point. It's also about these athletes giving something back to society. And of course, I've received recommendations for action from the boss, and one of the points is expanding both the quality and quantity of support. It's also about efficiency and digitalization. It's also about working together with all the stakeholders in sports. It's about dual careers, what happens afterwards, and how education can support that. And of course, it's also about performance and mental performance. So that's an important aspect of this Vision 2030, which we're currently working on implementing, and it's something that will be the next phase, the next stage of this success story.
Maybe it's also an idea, I don't know, but that you could continue as a sports soldier. Right now, corporal is as high as it goes. You're a corporal because you're in the military for a certain period. Otherwise, you only become a corporal if you win a medal at the Olympic Games or World Championships, or if you become the Schwingerkönig or achieve something special. So, if you deliver an outstanding performance. Are there any ideas about that as well? Because people who are top athletes would actually be perfect for leadership roles, and a sports career doesn't last forever, so something like that could shine in a sustainable way. What happens after their sports career is over? Are there any ideas about maybe keeping these people, making them sergeants, for example, and then assigning them again, like as sports officers in large units or something like that?
Well, with the current system, it's not planned for sports soldiers to continue on. That's basically the foundation we have, because with the support system we have, we help a lot of people, but there are many we aren't allowed to support. The focus is on elite sports, on performance, and on results. What happens after their sports career, making sure these athletes have a career after sports, is something I really support, because all the experience they gain, the clear goals they set, the way they fight for those goals, and all the skills they develop, those are, of course, extremely valuable for any future employer. And of course, as the DDPS, as the federal government, we are interested in high-performing individuals continuing on. In the few cases we've had, they basically started their basic military training somewhere else so they could acquire all the necessary skills. Currently, in our system as it stands, this is not planned, but who knows what the future will bring. That's something we'll address later on. But that's not the primary goal.
If you had a wish right now, if a fairy came to you and said you have one wish, you can change something immediately. In the Sports Competence Center, what would you change right away?
Well, the successes are there. We have enough athletes, enough interested people. What keeps me busy almost every day right now are all the special situations. It ranges from the administrative hurdles we have, because of course elite athletes have different needs. That also includes athletes who are unfit for duty, and there are still many obstacles there. But I have to say, these processes, which are sometimes extremely complicated, it's not that the staff want to make things difficult for the group. So I find support everywhere, but we really need to take another important step forward so that we can be even more efficient and don't have to go through unnecessary, time-consuming loops to support these dedicated sports soldiers. Digitalization is definitely an issue there. Simpler processes being faster. There's still potential there. Okay.
2028, Los Angeles, the big goal. What does that look like for you now? How should I picture that? Do you have something like a project management plan with milestones, what you want to achieve by when? Do you have a plan, or what does that look like?
Yes, there is definitely a 4-year plan, which is always done in the Olympic cycle, but it's actually more about the smaller milestones along the way. World Championships, European Championships that take place, and in the end, just always keeping the big goal in mind. But still, taking it step by step, completing the training every day, and getting a little closer each time. But specifically, this year there are definitely World Championships, which will already be the first opportunity to qualify. That means, yes, it's really about training as well as possible, staying injury-free, and getting closer to Los Angeles day by day.
And at some point, if you, God willing, and of course we hope so, become an Olympic champion, and maybe in 2 or 3 years, maybe you'll go to the Olympics again, I don't know, but at some point your sports career will come to an end. What will Michelle do after her sports career?
I think that's a big topic, especially in sports where things can change quickly. I've experienced it myself with injuries. That's why I'm also pursuing a degree on the side. I'm finishing my bachelor's degree in communication and media this summer. So that probably means working in this field, but it's also important to me to stay involved in sports in some way and to be able to give something back. So you'll definitely still find me somewhere in the sports world.
If a young woman, young men, or kids, or whoever, I see you and maybe feel inspired and say, I want to try diving too, it's important to realize that diving isn't exactly a sport you can find just anywhere, since opportunities to participate in it are often quite limited and not as easily accessible as many other sports. So what should someone do now? Where should they reach out? Where can he or she go to try out this sport?
Well, if you go through the National Association, Swiss Aquatics, you'll find the contacts. But honestly, you can also just reach out directly without hesitation. Just send an email and I can pass on the contacts. I think that works too. Yeah, and it's probably also nice that people help each other out. That means, really, just feel free to reach out. My email address is on my website, and you can contact me, and then I'll be happy to pass on the relevant contacts depending on your region.
What's your website address?
Michelle, Heimberg, CH.
Michelle, Heimberg, CH. So if anyone is interested in platform diving or springboard diving, they can get in touch with you. That's really, really nice. We've reached the end. Is there anything we might have forgotten to talk about? Something you'd really like to share with the audience before we wrap up? In connection with the Sports Competence Center.
Well, I'm truly proud of all our sports soldiers, whether they're in basic training, refresher courses, or serving as temporary military personnel. They really are role models, and they inspire Switzerland to dream. And this aspect, the inspiration, strength, and motivation they bring to all of Switzerland is extremely important. And I'm sure that's true even when they're not currently carrying weapons. And that's so important, so that we, as regular professional soldiers, as well as all the officers and soldiers in the Swiss Army, truly realize just how important it is to do sports, not just to stay physically fit, but to remain mentally fit and healthy as well.
You said to make people dream, not just to make them dream, but also to make them cheer. And we've had the chance to cheer quite a few times, thanks to the top athletes who were with you. Is there any message from your side that you'd like to share before we wrap up?
I don't think there's anything new, but I'm repeating myself. I really believe, whether it's in sports, in the army, or just in everyday life, you shouldn't forget why you're doing what you do, and that joy and fun should have, and must have, a high priority.
The last question. I ask this of all my guests. What is your wish for the Chief of the Army?
I think my wish would be that the support for us athletes really continues as it has, and that it's even expanded further.
And for you?
That he supports me in implementing the vision, and that he truly recognizes and utilizes this soft power potential to further improve the Swiss Army's defense capabilities.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming to the studio. Of course, I wish both of you all the best. And of course, I hope that in 2028 we'll be able to celebrate you as an Olympic champion. That's my wish, and also that you achieve everything you set out to do in your studies and in your civilian and private life, everything you hope for. And of course, the same goes for you. I hope you continue to be successful with the elite sports promotion work you do, and that you can keep celebrating and dreaming together with the athletes who come to you in Maglingen. Thank you very much for being here.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you. Thank you.